Hey guys, Spud here, as always, and today we have a video that I've been waiting to make for a very long time now. A cold start, taxi, and takeoff tutorial in one of my favorite military aircraft of all time. The F-15E Strike Eagle coming to DCS from third-party developer RAZBAM. Thanks to the RAZBAM 3D Artist Metal2Mesh, over the last several months, I was awarded the privilege of getting an up-close look at all of the work, effort, and love put into this module by the amazing coders and artists over at RAZBAM, and I'm so happy to inform you that it's just around the corner. So let's hop in the office and get started. Oh geez guys, it is so exciting to be this close to the release of the F-15E Strike Eagle from RAZBAM. I know a lot of you guys out there have been waiting a very long time for this jet, and as a DCS World content creator, this is one of my very favorite things, being able to show off such a highly anticipated new addition to DCS World that I think so many of you guys are going to love for so long after release. Now I've double checked the version of this build, so that shouldn't be a problem for us today. And we're on the ramp at Hatsarim Air Base on the upcoming DCS Sinai map. Shortly we'll be taking off and heading towards the Negev Desert for some joint exercises between Lakenheath F-15Es, No. 69 Hammer Squadron RAAMs, and some F-16s from the Royal Jordanian Air Force. Now you might be wondering about the rather funky loadout on the CFT of the RAAM at our 3 o'clock. This odd mixture of Sparrows and AMRAAMs has been photographed not just on the RAAM, but also the albino Baz and a Kef as well. The reason for this interesting mix of Sparrows and AMRAAMs is kind of twofold. The AIM-7 still makes up a rather large chunk of the stocks of air-to-air missiles in the IAF's inventory, as well as the fact that even here in 2023, the AIM-7 Sparrow can offer an advantage over the AIM-120 AMRAAM in certain situations, such as shooting down large aircraft like strategic bombers, or more likely in the case of the Israeli Air Force, the rather horrific need to shoot down a hijacked airliner. For today's startup, we'll consider the aircraft to be cold and dark on the ramp, and we're preparing it for its very first flight of the day. That means a full battery of fire detection loop tests, as well as a full INS alignment. Now here in the F-15E, unlike the other 4th gen aircraft that we have in DCS World, we can't just flip a switch, turn on the APU, and then get the engines going. We have to actually complete a little bit of cockpit prep before we can get started. So let's jump right on in. First, we need to prevent the transfer of fuel from our CFTs or conformal fuel tanks to the rest of our fuel system for engine startup and taxi. Locate the fuel panel just forward and outboard of the throttle. Use a left click on the conformal tank switch to move it to the forward stop transfer position. Ensure to return the switch to the normal position while holding short of the runway as part of your pre-takeoff checks. Moving forward to the miscellaneous panel, set the inlet ramp switches to the forward automatic position prior to engine start. Next, move to the right-hand console and locate the air conditioning panel along the right-hand wall of the cockpit. This panel is partially obscured by the canopy handle, and you may need to use your track IR or VR to shift your shoulders left or right to find the main switch on the air conditioning panel. Use 2 right clicks to bring the switch to the forward automatic position. This allows bleed air to automatically flow from your engines to the air conditioning system for cockpit pressurization, keeping us nice and cool, and most importantly, keeping our avionics nice and cool. Move to the engine panel on the forward section of the right-hand console. Turn on the 2 generator switches, as well as the engine master switch for both the left-hand number 1 engine and the right-hand number 2 engine. Energize the JFS by moving the starter switch to the on position. We now have all of our cockpit prep items complete. But before we continue with our startup, let's talk about how the JFS or Jet Fuel Starter System works in the F-15E. Without getting too complex or deep into the weeds, an APU and JFS are very similar. They're both two small turbine engines that assist in the starting of the main engines of a jet aircraft. However, they go about this in two pretty different ways. An APU uses bleed air to spin up a jet engine for startup, whereas our JFS uses mechanical linkages from gearboxes to spin up our engines for the start. The JFS in our F-15 has two high-pressure bottles mounted between the engines that are full of hydraulic fluid and pressurized by inert nitrogen gas. When we pull on the JFS start handle on the bottom right of the instrument panel, that high-pressure hydraulic fluid flows through the central gearbox, also mounted between the engines. The gearbox spins up the JFS. Fuel is automatically applied, and igniters ignite the fuel, and the self-perpetuating system of a turbine engine continues from there. Once the JFS has spun up to operational speed, it takes over from the hydraulic fluid, and the hydraulic fluid is cut off, and the central gearbox is powered by the JFS. When cranking an engine, a mechanical linkage is made between the airframe-mounted accessory drive, or AMAD, of the engine and the central gearbox. This spins up the engine, and moving the throttle to the idle detent introduces fuel and excites the igniters, igniting the fuel and starting the self-perpetuating turbine system from there. So let's stop talking about it and actually do it. The green, ready light shows that the JFS is spun up to its operational speed. We're ready to crank an engine, but we first must perform a fire detection loop test. The fire switch on the left-hand side of the instrument panel has two positions: up for discharging an armed fire bottle into an engine to extinguish a fire from catastrophic engine failure or battle damage, and down for testing the fire detection loops in various systems of our engines. Use a right click to move the switch to the down position.
Fire. Warning, AMAD, fire.
We now have a good test of the fire detection loops in our airframe-mounted accessory drives. As we move through successive fire tests, more of the fire warning lights will illuminate, and Bitch and Betty's script will get longer and longer. We're now ready to crank our engines. We always start the number 2 right-hand engine first in the F-15E. We crank the engine by pulling up on the finger lifts on the front end of the throttle grip. To accomplish this in DCS, click on the finger lift in question. This connects the drive shaft between the central gearbox and the AMAD, spinning up the engine. We can see the airframe start to buffet and shake as the AMAD spins the engine up to 26% RPM. Once we're stabilized at 26% RPM, we can conduct our next fire test.
Warning, AMAD, fire. Warning, AMAD, fire. Warning, engine, fire, left. Warning, engine, fire, left. Warning, engine, fire, right. Warning, engine, fire, right.
We now have a good fire test, and we can see that more of the fire warning lights are illuminating, and Bitch and Betty's script is getting longer and longer. We can now bring the right-hand throttle to the idle detent. On your keyboard, hit right shift and home to introduce the fuel to the right-hand engine. If the light off does not occur right away, don't panic. You haven't done anything incorrect. It just takes a little bit longer in the F-15E than it does in other modules. At 57% RPM, electrical power will be applied to the systems of our aircraft. With our throttle at idle, the engines will stabilize at 72% RPM. We can see our fuel totalizer counting way up there. With full internal tanks, CFTs, and 2 external tanks, we have 30,500 pounds of gas, almost double that of a fully loaded F-14 Tomcat. When the utility hydraulic pressure is in the green, we can set our brake hold, which is essentially our parking brake in the F-15E Strike Eagle. We want to set that so that way when Chief pulls the chocks, we don't start rolling across the ramp. We now want to perform a lights test. Find the interior lighting panel and press and hold a click on the light test switch. We want to ensure that all of our caution and advisory lights around the cockpit are illuminating as advertised. This can be a great way to troubleshoot your aircraft in the event of battle damage or a system failure when you believe a light should be illuminated and it is not in your cockpit, and you can rule out a light bulb failure. Alright, that looks like a good test to me. We can now turn on our radios to get our Wizzo up on the radio, up with ATC, and the rest of our flight to get the ball rolling. Turn up the brightness of your UFC, and I like to go ahead and turn up the brightness of my HUD while I'm there. Let's put the aircraft into navigational master mode. We can see R1 off and R2 off on the UFC, showing us that both radios are currently off. To turn the radios on, use your mouse wheel to scroll on the channel select knob to turn the radio on. For the sake of today's video and showing you guys, we're going to enter a manual frequency into our radios. Ground here at Hatzerim is 257.25. To move an entry from the scratch pad to a line on the UFC, click on the line in question. This operates very similarly to how FMSs and airliners work, so if you've flown around an airliner in Microsoft Flight Simulator, this should be very familiar to you. We can also see that when we put a manual frequency into a radio, the previous frequency populates in the scratch pad in case we've made a mistake. That way we can pop it back in very easily and get back to our previous station. We'll put up the intraflight frequency for today on the VHF radio as well. Next, we can crank our left-hand engine. The finger lift can be a little bit hard to see when sitting in the cockpit with our right throttle in the idle detent. Slide your shoulders to the left with VR or Track IR to find that finger lift. Connect the central gearbox to your AMAD, and we can feel the airframe buffet and shake as the engine spins up to 26% RPM. Once we're there, we can perform our final fire test. Right click.
Warning, AMAD, fire. Warning, AMAD, fire. Warning, engine, fire, left. Warning, engine, fire, left. Warning, engine, fire, right. Warning, engine, fire, right. AB burn through, left. AB burn through, left. AB burn through, right. AB burn through, right.
Fantastic. Looks like a good fire test. We could see all of our fire warning lights were illuminated this time, and Bitchin' Betty got through her entire script. We can now introduce fuel to the left-hand engine. On your keyboard, hit right Alt and Home to bring the left throttle to the idle detent. Again, the light-off does not occur right away in the F-15E, so don't panic if it takes a while for the light-off to occur. Once the engine passes 57% RPM, we should see a lot of these additional cautions and advisories extinguish. That looks like 2 good starts for me. Let's go ahead and get our canopy closed. Let's clear out this nuisance master caution so that's not flashing in the face. And with a right click on the canopy handle, bring the switch to the operate position. This will lower our canopy, and another right-hand click on the canopy handle will lock the canopy in place. We want to ensure that our canopy unlocked, the caution and advisory light is extinguished. Let's go ahead and turn on our oxygen so we can breathe, and we'll check the blinker to ensure the flow is flowing, and we'll check our oxygen pressure. We want to ensure this is in the green before we start taxiing. When flight control is the only caution and advisory left illuminated, it's time for a flight control check. Before that, let's go ahead and bring power to our MPDs and MPCD real quick. Use the rocker switch to the up on position to bring power to the 2 MPDs and the MPCD. We need to perform 2 flight control checks, one with CAS off and one with CAS on. We should look over our shoulder as we perform the control wipe to check and ensure our flight control surfaces are moving as advertised, and our crew chief out there in front of us will have his eyes on them as well, ensuring that he likes it just as much as we do. There's check number 1. The CAS panel is located just forward of the throttle. Use a left click to bring the yaw, roll, and pitch switches to the on positions. We can see the flight control, caution, and advisory is now extinguished. Time for our second flight control check. All looks good to me, and our invisible crew chief says it's good to go as well. At this point, we can head aft on our left-hand console to the sensor panel. This can be a little bit hard to see with Track IR, but we'll try to display it as best as we can for you guys. We can bring our position lights to the on position, our anti-collision lights on as well. Formation and tail flood lights are only used after sunset and before sunrise. Radar to the standby position, radar altimeter to the on position, terrain following radar to the standby position, nav FLIR to the standby position, INS to the GC position for a full INS alignment, and JTIDs to the norm position. On our HUD, we now have the advisory of GC PP required. This lets us know that we must enter our present position into the UFC for the INS alignment to begin. When we move the INS knob to the GC position, the PP page automatically populates on the UFC. On your keyboard, hit right shift and K to bring up your kneeboard. Your present position is written out on the top left box of your kneeboard. To enter in the northing latitude coordinate, hit the shift key on your UFC, 2 for north, 3, 1, 1, 4, 5, 0, 0. Note that the decimal point is automatically placed for you on the UFC when entering in coordinates, unlike when we were entering in a manual radio frequency. We'll enter that into the northing box, and we'll enter in our easting. Shift 6 for east, a preceding 0, 3, 4, 3, 9, 6, 8, 9. Whoop, that wasn't correct. Let's clear it out. Shift east, preceding 0, 3, 4, 3, 9, 6, 8, 8. Once that is entered in, we can get rid of the kneeboard for now, and we can see that the advisory on our HUD is now GC No Taxi. This lets us know not to move our aircraft as the INS is starting its alignment. No Taxi will be replaced with a numerical value very shortly to let us know the quality of our alignment. Moving back out, at this point, everything is kind of housekeeping and just setting up various systems, and you can do it in any order that you like. We'll uncage our standby ADI. We do this in the F-15E by clicking and holding and using our mouse wheel to adjust the aircraft symbol to the horizon and letting go of our mouse click. One of the cool little things that RAZBAM implemented into the F-15E is our angle of attack indicator will randomly bounce around as we're sitting on the ramp as if it were being influenced by the wind, like in a real aircraft. We'll set our local altimeter setting of 29906 for today. You want to input whatever value is present for your altimeter setting in your mission briefing. We'll program our displays. On my right MPD, I should like to have my armament page, my TSD, and my twos. If we want to redo this, undo the various pages, and let's say maybe instead I want to do my TPOD page, my twos page, and my TSD. On my left MPD, I always like to have my air-to-air radar, my armament page, and my twos. Down on my MPCD, I always like to have programmed my TSD, my HSI, and my twos once again. I always like being able to quickly bring up my twos on any of my screens in order to quickly see any threats on the ground or in the air around me. Programming your displays allows you to use your castle switch to very quickly sort through the pages you have programmed. This can be very valuable when you're up in the air and seconds count. Using castle switch right in this case allows us to swap through the program pages on the right MPD. Castle switch left, and castle switch down. On the MPD, an additional page is automatically programmed, the ADI page, to allow you to bring up the ADI quickly in case you get disoriented in IMC, something that is very, very important. So let's leave that on the TSD. For taxi, on my right MPD, I like to bring up my HSI. On my left MPD, I like to have my HUD repeater up in case I get pointed into the sun and cannot read the values on my HUD anymore. We can see GC 1.1, we're very close to having our INS alignment complete. And there we go, GC OK. We can move back on our left console all the way back to our sensor panel, to our INS knob, and use a right click and a right click only to bring the knob from the GC to the navigation position. Using a left click will turn the knob left to the store or off position, forcing you to redo the alignment. We'll check around our front seat here, make sure we have everything we need all set up and ready to go. Everything is looking good. I like to bring up my data page on the UFC for when I'm taxiing, so that way I can see my ground speed in knots here. The pedostatic system of the F-15E bottoms out at 14 knots, making it rather hard to see exactly how fast you're taxiing. Alright, lastly, we'll arm our ejection seat and set our bingo to 6,000 pounds of gas for today's mission. Your bingo is denoted by the little white bug on the outer ring of your fuel quantity knob. We'll head to the back seat and finish off the cold start procedure. Alright, in the back here, we'll turn on our MPCDs and MPDs. We'll populate the desired pages, TSD, armament, our HUD repeater, and our 2s. We'll turn up the brightness of our UFC, which is just a carbon copy of the UFC in the front seat. Everything we did in the front seat can be done on the UFC in the back seat as well. Coming down the right-hand console, we want to turn on our oxygen, which is hidden behind the right-hand hand controller. We want to make sure that our blinker is showing our oxygen flow. We'll do a quick lights test and ensure that all of our caution and advisory lights are illuminating as advertised. Everything is looking good there. We'll turn on our internal countermeasures set. Raw equipment to on, EWIS to on, countermeasures to standby. And moving around to the left-hand console, we want to ensure our laser is set to safe so we don't blind anybody on the ground here. We want to bring our target flare switch to the standby position to start warming up our targeting pod. This is a switch that Wizzos are going to want to bring to standby pretty quick in the startup procedure, because it takes 5 to 8 minutes for the Lantern targeting pod to warm up, align itself, and be ready for use. Raw ICS switch to combat. Pods and ICS will leave to off and standby. This is due to the fact that we don't want to transmit our EW on the ground. Moving after that, we're good to go. We'll arm our ejection seat. We'll uncage our standby ADI. And we'll set our local altimeter setting of 29906. We can also see our fuel totalizer, a clock, an airspeed indicator, a VSI, and a pressure altimeter. Alright guys, we are ready to taxi, so let's head back to the front seat and get going. Here at Hatsarim, we're in a very narrow kind of alley where we're parked, so we want to be very, very careful as we're taxiing. So we can adjust our mirrors to see our wingtips to ensure we're not going to run into anything. Mirrors in the cockpit of your fighter jet aren't really there to check your 6 o'clock, they're more for situational awareness as you're taxiing around on the ground, or to see your beautiful Wizzo Spud in the back seat there. We want to take a look at the F10 map and talk with our Wizzo about our taxi route out to runway 28 right, our runway that's been assigned. Coming out of our taxiway, it's going to be a left-hand turn, down to the end of the runway, followed by a right-hand turn, where we'll hold short of runway 28 right. Alright, does that sound good, Spud? Yeah, that sounds good. Alright, let's go for it. We'll turn on our taxi light to get the attention of our crew chief. We'll give him the pull chalk signal.
Chief, remove the wheel chocks. Copy. Wheel chocks are now removed.
And a fun little addition to the aircraft that RAZBAM coded in there is the aircraft will jump and bounce a little bit when the chocks are removed. We'll turn our brake hold off, and we'll very gently advance the throttles so that way we can get in a brake test in this very tight alleyway at Hatsarim Air Base. Immediately get on those brakes. Good brake test. A very quick little wiggle of the nose wheel steering. Great. This is one of the few instances where I would say you cannot trust the center line that's drawn on the taxiway here. We want to make sure that we're verifying with our eyeballs that we're not going to hit the fence, any of this ground support equipment, or the RAZBAMs off to our right-hand side. Taxiing in the F-15E is rather straightforward, As we can see on these RAZBAMs, the nose wheel is right behind your butt in the ejection seat in the front seat. Alright, we're going to double check, make sure we're not going to hit anything. Yeesh, that's a little bit close. We definitely need some wing walkers to help us get out of here. Alright, we'll use the center line to parallel it to keep us going in a straight line, but we're definitely not going to be taxiing directly on the center line. It can be exceedingly easy in the F-15E with a light loadout to get way too fast on the taxi. I highly recommend taking turns below 10 knots and your maximum taxi speed on a straightaway between 15 and 20 knots of ground speed. I really wouldn't go any faster than that. Use our mirrors, make sure, how's that looking? Looks like we're clear. Beautiful. Alright, following the taxi route we were given, and that we discussed with our Wizzo Spud in the back seat, we'll make a left-hand turn onto the taxiway. And we can see our ground speed's about 5 knots, perfect for a nice sharp turn. The nose wheel and its sensitivity feels somewhere in between high gain nose wheel steering and low gain nose wheel steering in the FA-18 Hornet, making it pretty darn easy to navigate the tight confines of the Israeli air bases on the DCS Sinai map. Once we get to a nice open straightaway, our Wizzo will probably go heads down in the cockpit and start working on additional systems of the aircraft. We'll set Program 1 in our packs to our Mark 82s. We'll do a C-dip release, ripple multiple, nose and tail for the fusing, quantity of 11 to drop all the bombs with one press of our pickle button in one stick. Program 2 will be our GBU 12s and an automatic release, ripple single, nose and tail for our fusing. I'm always a huge advocate of doing as much as you possibly can system-wise on the ground before you get up into the air. It's very easy in DCS with the short transit times of most missions that you'll probably forget something and then end up in a fight wishing you'd set something up on the ground that was absolutely critical to staying alive up in the air. As you can see on this little downhill section, we got going pretty darn fast real quick. So we'll start getting our ground speed back under 20 knots, somewhere around 15 knots is where I'm most comfortable with. There's nothing worse than accidentally slamming into the back of another aircraft in a packed multiplayer airbase. It's definitely not a good way to make friends, and it's definitely not very fun. Alright, we saw on the F10 map that the right-hand turn to hold short of runway 28 right is down here by this little pile of additional ground support equipment. And I hope that this is a really good preview for you guys about how alive the air bases on the DCS Sinai map feel. It's really cool, and a great addition to a DCS world map. Alright, we'll follow this taxiway to the right-hand side. We'll hold short of runway 28 right and go through our pre-takeoff checks. This is one of the only aircraft in DCS world that has quite a few items that we need to make sure we hit before we take the runway for our takeoff. We'll turn our brake hold on. That's definitely going to be a friend for you guys in the F-15E, so that way you don't accidentally start rolling as you're going through your pre-takeoff checks. Coming down to the left-hand console, conformal tank switch to the norm position, landing light to the takeoff position. You want to press and hold the takeoff trim button until we get a green trim light.
Yaw rate.
We want to bring our flaps down to the full flap position by hitting left shift and F on our keyboard. When flap is illuminated in amber, that means the flaps are in transit, and when they're green, the flaps are down and locked and ready to go. Moving down through the left-hand console, we'll turn our radar from standby to on, and if we needed to use our terrain following radar, our nav FLIR, or any of those systems, we could turn those on now as well. We'll do a quick look through our cockpit, make sure we've got everything. Everything's looking good. We'll go back to the main menu of our UFC, and we'll talk about our departure procedure. Coming off of 28 right at Hatsarim Air Base will put us over the middle of the Gaza Strip pretty darn quick. Now the IAF jets might want to go wake up the terrorists and buzz Gaza City on the way out for our training exercise today, but because we're flying an American jet, we're going to try to avoid that. We'll turn our brake hold off. We'll make sure we've got our takeoff clearance. We'll check final to make sure nobody's going to land on us. We'll check the runway to ensure that we don't take off right into anybody. And we'll take the runway. We'll reset track IR. The F-15E prefers static takeoffs because we need to stabilize our engines at 82% RPM before we smoothly push them up and over the gates and into afterburner. Alright, we'll hit the brakes. We'll look down, and we'll keep track of our engine RPM as we smoothly advance our throttles. We can see that RAZBAM coded the engines to not perfectly mirror each other as they would in real life. Alright, we're straddling 82% RPM. That's good enough for me. We'll release our brakes. We'll smoothly push our throttle up, over the gates, and into burner. At this heavy weight, we'll be rotating at 160 knots. Right, there's VR, smoothly pulling back on the stick, getting the gear retracted and the flaps sucked up pretty quick so we don't overspeed them. And we'll climb out about 5 degrees nose up until we reach about 300 knots or so. And we'll make that left-hand turn, pull the throttles out of burner, and we'll avoid flying over Gaza. We'll fly direct to steer point 2, input a 2 onto the scratch pad of your UFC, and plop that into the steer point section on the top right of your UFC. Right, we can start climbing a little steeper, and we'll be heading out to the Negev Desert. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope it was a great look into the F-15E Strike Eagle and its startup procedure. And if you enjoyed the video, please give us a like and a subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Hey, what's that little magnetic sensor doing there on the canopy rail?